General Cooper, is that you? The bustling conference room fell silent. The question uttered by a colonel who had just entered drew dozens of eyes toward me. They looked at me as if I had stepped out of a forgotten page of history. A young soldier whispered I thought she retired. I raised my head, smiled, responded with silence. The silence that had followed me for 2 decades. Hello, I am Hannah Cooper. My name isn't familiar to the media. No articles, no gleaming medals in front of cameras. But if you served in NATO's special operations from the Middle East to East Africa, you might have heard my voice over the radio, or decoded my orders from an underground bunker unmarked on any map. Before I tell my story, know the story of a family. I ask you to take a moment to hit follow on this channel, or leave a comment with one word present. Because sometimes knowing someone is listening is enough to begin. My Cooper family has a tradition, uniforms and expectations. My grandfather commanded an armored battalion in World War II. My father, Roy Cooper, retired as a colonel after 30 years in the Air Force. My mother, Marilyn, was a combat medic, the first woman in her unit to receive the Valor Medal. And then there was us 3 children raised in the shadow of Flag's discipline and Sunday morning salutes. I was the eldest. Next came Matthew, now a lieutenant colonel specializing in cyber warfare. And the youngest, Lena Cooper, the family's star. Lena always had a light that made others look up. Even as a child, she spoke as if addressing a council. She entered the military academy on a full scholarship, graduated with honors, and was selected for officer command training before she even finished school. Every holiday, my parents hung Lena's commendations on the wall, like they were building a museum. Once, when I visited, I saw a model of the base Lena commanded during summer training displayed on the dining table. And me. My photo stopped at 2004, a snapshot taken just before my freshman graduation at West Point. After that, I disappeared. No one asked why. No one mentioned it again. The truth is, I didn't drop out. I was recruited into a special program, a strategic intelligence unit operating in the shadows, unlisted, unnamed. We moved by signals, not schedules. But my family didn't know, or perhaps didn't want to know. The first time I came home after 3 years, my mother said only one thing when she saw me in civilian clothes. Not everyone is born to shine, Hannah. And that's okay. Her voice was gentle, almost soothing. But those words cut like a clean blade through my heart. From then on, every visit home felt like I was a guest. Every question came with a fleeting glance. My father never reproached me, but his silence spoke louder than any judgment. When I appeared at home, he'd retreat to his study where Lena's portrait in uniform hung prominently behind his desk. Lena never meant to hurt me. But her carelessness sometimes cut deeper than intent. At a family reunion dinner when a cousin asked what I did, Lena laughed lightly. My sister dabbled in the military, now does something administrative. The table chuckled politely. I swallowed the words I wanted to say, because what I had done, what I had faced, had no place at a table with scented candles and white wine. I survived an ambush in Mosul, led a team across the Syrian border in the dead of night. But that wasn't enough to earn a seat in the family's New Year photo. I learned to stay silent. When your truth has no place to be believed, you learn to keep it like a scar in your palm visible, but no one asks about it. The last time I came home was when Lena received a medal for outstanding leadership in joint exercises. I stood quietly at the back of the hall, watching my parents embrace their youngest daughter with pride. When I approached, my mother gave a polite smile. "Hannah, you came. Lena will be pleased." No one asked where I'd come from or what I'd been through to be there. This story isn't about complaints. I didn't choose an easy path, but I also didn't choose to be forgotten. I stayed silent for 20 years as a strategy. But now, as secrets begin to leak, as the name Cooper reappears in military courts and media, I know it's time to speak. Because some stories, if you don't tell them, others will rewrite and erase you from your own memory. This is why I'm starting to tell it all from the beginning. From the day I left West Point, not because I failed, but because I was chosen. From the day I signed a pledge my parents would never know to trade for nameless battles and comrades without graves. From the day I came home and realized the place that was once my haven is now a museum honoring someone else. I know that telling this will mean facing old shadows, maybe even truths more painful than I imagined. But if you're still here, still reading or listening, then perhaps I'm not alone. And maybe the truth, even if late, is still worth speaking. You can refuse, but if you agree, you won't be a West Point cadet anymore. No diploma, no graduation ceremony, no mention in any records. The colonel spoke without a hint of threat. His tone was as plain as a weather report. But I knew this was the first and perhaps the greatest turning point of my life. I nodded, without hesitation. 3 weeks later, I left the military academy as a dropout. In truth, I was inducted into a special program, a strategic intelligence force operating outside all official records. No insignia, no name tags. No one was allowed to know we existed. Years later, when I returned to the U.S. on a covert mission, I saw a post on a West Point alumni forum, Hannah Cooper, the fallen star. I laughed. A laugh without sound. I can't tell you everything I did. Most of it remains in files marked classified. But I can share what won't harm anyone, just so you understand I didn't disappear. I was erased from the public picture. My first operation was in Syria. The government was still denying the presence of U.S. Special Forces in the region. We landed in a small, unmapped village tasked with dismantling a terrorist financing hub. I planned the withdrawal, a network of 3 underground escape routes. 5 soldiers survived because of those tunnels. One sent me a blood-stained scarf, the only thanks I ever received. I still keep it. Libya. A seemingly abandoned seaside house, but hidden in its walls were international hostages used as human shields. I spent 4 days there in darkness with only a covert radio and the tense sound of breathing in the shadows. We got 30 people out, no fatalities, but 2 of my team didn't return. One had said, "You should be the commander." I never commanded publicly, because I didn't belong to any unit. 3 years later, Eastern Europe. A sabotage network targeting NATO defense infrastructure was uncovered. I posed as a security consultant living in a hotel with a Czech businessman I knew was a spy. We played chess every night. He didn't know that each time I lost, I uploaded a code string to a remote analysis system. 12 days later, the net closed. I left the hotel before dawn without a goodbye. As always, my name wasn't in the success report. Every year, I sent birthday flowers to my mother, her favorites white daisies and lavender, ordered from the shop near home with a card. "Hope you're well. Hannah." No reply ever came. At Christmas, I sent postcards to my father, pictures of a nameless desert night sky. On the back, I wrote, "I'm somewhere without snow, but I miss home." I don't know if he read them. I only know they were never returned. Lena never texted. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she thought I was a small scratch on the family's golden record. I know there's a 2013 family photo, everyone in uniform smiling on the porch. I was once there, but in the version hung later, I was gone. My mother said it was to balance the frame. I think it was simply because I no longer fit the picture. Living in the shadows has its price. No celebratory speeches. No days of honor. No one says thank you for being on the front line. I once drove through an icy Kosovo night to track a smuggled uranium shipment. I posed as a war correspondent to approach a drug lord funding insurgents. I stood 7 minutes from a timed bomb and had to decide if there was time to save someone. I cut the wire, and I was right, 18 seconds to spare. But back at base, I was escorted to an isolation room. No one was allowed to know why I was there. Once I almost gave up. I was detained for 3 days in an underground cell on the Afghan border, not tortured, just silently tormented. I didn't know who lived or died outside. Only the sound of footsteps and the clank of locks when the guard approached. On the 3rd day, they released me due to a high-level intervention. I don't know who called to save me. Maybe the system I thought had abandoned me. I returned, showered, ate cold noodles, then wrote the plan for the next operation. I realized I didn't need recognition. I just needed to know someone. Someone I'd never meet was safe, because I stayed silent and did what was right. But one thing I couldn't prepare for the feeling of being a stranger to my own family. The last time I called home, my mother answered. She thought it was the utility company. When I said, "Mom, it's Hannah," she paused for 3 seconds, then, "Oh, are you okay?" I knew she was trying to recall where I was in my life. I laughed. "Still breathing, so I'm okay. Right, Mom?" She didn't reply. The call ended with, "Take care." I didn't blame her. It's hard to love what you don't understand. Harder still when it forces you to rethink success, honor, and sacrifice. My family loved the nation and the image the nation built for winners. I never stepped onto a podium. I wrote the script, then left the stage before the lights came on. One night, I sorted through an old box of documents. Inside was an envelope with no sender. I opened it and stood frozen. A handwritten letter scrawled hastily, "Lieutenant Cooper, you don't know me, but I was a soldier in Operation Candlestrike. Because of your plan, we escaped. 2 of my friends didn't make it, but the rest of the unit survived because of you. I'm writing this before my 3rd mission. If I don't return, at least you'll know someone thanks you even if your name is nowhere. Signed Private Nolan T. I don't know if he's still alive, but I keep that letter close to my heart. Some papers without official stamps weigh more than any medal. You were in the military for a while, right? The question came from a stranger at the banquet table holding a glass of wine, his eyes scanning me as if trying to place where we'd met. His tone wasn't malicious, just uninformed, but it cut like a fine, polite, deep wound. I smiled, faintly didn't answer. Because really, what could I say? Where to begin? That I didn't just dabble in the military, but walked in and out of lands whose names couldn't be printed on maps. That I sat in the crossfire to save lives the world didn't know were at risk. But I said nothing. I stood there a nameless guest in my own family. I returned to Fort Campbell on a late autumn day. Red leaves blanketed the familiar road to the base where I once belonged, where my father taught defense tactics, where my sister fired her first shot. But this time, no one waited at the gate. No car to pick me up, no expectant eyes, no open arms. I parked a few blocks from the ceremonial hall near the logistics fence, where no one cares who you are. As I stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my boots felt achingly familiar, as if the ground remembered me even if the people had long forgotten. The welcome party for Lena was held at our old house where I grew up, where every wall held medals, certificates, photos. I walked in, and no one greeted me. My mother stood by the dining table placing name cards in arranged positions. When she saw me, she didn't approach, only said, "Hannah, change your clothes. Sit by Lena, but please don't interrupt her speech tomorrow." I nodded slightly. Didn't ask why my seat was against the wall between a distant relative and an unknown captain. My name card read simply, "Guest." I wandered into the living room. On the wall was the familiar row of framed photos, my father at his medal ceremony, my mother in her young medic uniform, Lena at her oath-taking. A family portrait hung prominently in the center, U.S. standing on the porch, the flag waving behind. I remembered that moment clearly. I stood next to my father still holding an M4 I hadn't put away. But now I was no longer in the frame. I looked closely. The photo had been cropped to fit a new frame. I was the excess the part discarded. I swallowed hard, not out of pain, but because I was used to it. When Lena entered, her boots clicked lightly on the wooden floor. She was radiant in her ceremonial uniform, polished, confident, everything in place. She moved to the center of the room, shaking hands, hugging, then turned to me. "This is my sister," Lena said, smiling as if introducing an old colleague. She was at West Point, but switched paths. Now to something administrative. There was laughter, light, polite, but it choked the air. A relative leaned in, whispering, "Working at the veteran's office. Better than nothing, right?" I smiled, didn't answer, because sometimes silence is the only way to keep the last shred of dignity. That night I sat on the porch. The air was chilly. Inside, laughter echoed. People toasted Lena, recounting her recent achievements, their expectations for her next rank. I looked at my hands. The faint scar on my left wrist remained from disarming a mine in Syria. No one in that house knew about it. No one asked. I thought I could get used to it, but invisibility is never something you can train for. The next morning, I arrived early at the hall. Lena's promotion ceremony was grand. The military band, rehearsed officers of all ranks poured in. Seats were assigned by rank, and my name wasn't on the list. I was placed in the unidentified guests row with distant relatives or old classmates. I didn't complain. I just sat silently among a sea of shining uniforms. Lena stepped onto the podium, confident as if born for it. She spoke of discipline, loyalty, honor. She thanked our parents, superiors, teammates. Her eyes passed over me without pausing. She ended her speech with, "To those who couldn't uphold the title, quitting isn't a fault, but coming back is too late." I didn't move, didn't bow my head, didn't react. But each word was a cold needle piercing through my plain jacket. I understood. That was meant for me. And then the moment came. A senior general entered the hall. General Hammond, someone I'd worked with in Eastern Europe. He scanned the room, then stopped, where I sat. He approached, his steps, deliberate boots, clicking like commands. The hall fell silent. He raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Ma'am, General Cooper, an honor to meet you again." The hall froze. Lena dropped her notes. My mother flinched, spilling her glass. My father stood abruptly, then slowly sat back down. I stood, not for respect, but because I couldn't let someone who trusted me stand alone. I returned the salute, and in that moment I knew the darkness had retreated. The ceremony began like any formal military event, rhythmic, disciplined, timed to the second. In the grand hall adorned with stars and stripes and solemn uniforms, not a single extraneous sound echoed. All eyes were fixed on the stage where Lena, my sister, stood pristine in her newly pinned lieutenant colonel uniform. Lena began her speech. She spoke of family tradition, discipline, faith, and loyalty to the nation. Her words were carefully prepared. Her tone calm, her eyes gleaming with pride. She was the perfect spokesperson for a generation carrying the Cooper family honor. I sat 3 rows from the back, reserved for unidentified guests, those without rank outside the priority list. No medals adorned my chest, no name tag, no uniform. Just a dark blouse discreet enough that I thought I'd vanish under the lights. I was used to sitting at the back, used to feeling like an outsider even in my own family, until a pair of boots stopped beside me. I looked up. The figure stood tall, resolute, with 4 stars gleaming under the hall's lights. General Cooper. I heard each word, each syllable, honed like 100 practiced salutes. Not a casual greeting, not a mistake. It was a formal salute from one of the highest-ranking generals in the Joint Chiefs. It was General McAllister. The hall fell silent. Lena froze on the podium, her eyes confused. My mother, always composed, dropped her glass. The sound of shattering crystal rang clear in the stillness. My father, ever stern and calm, stood reflexively, then sat back down, his face unreadable. I stood slowly, not out of pride but duty. I couldn't let someone who trusted me salute alone before hundreds of watching eyes. General McAllister, I replied, returning the salute. The honor is mine. No one clapped. No one spoke. But the air in the room shifted. Curious glances turned to astonishment. Those who had passed me without a look now whispered my name in questions without answers. Lena tried to continue her speech. She flipped to the next page, but her voice trembled slightly. She spoke of perseverance, of those loyal to the uniform, of those who abandoned duty as a vague attempt to reclaim attention. But it was too late. From where I stood, I saw eyes shift away from her. Not because I wanted it, but because truth has its own weight. It doesn't need a voice. It reshapes the air by its presence. When the ceremony ended, people left their seats, small conversations sparking like a chain reaction. I stayed unhurried, not seeking anyone. But a woman approached me. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you really General Cooper?" I looked at her, nodded slightly. "My son served in Syria," she continued, her voice trembling. "He spoke of a female commander who saved his unit from a nighttime raid. He didn't know her name, just called her the shadow in the sand. They survived because of her." I didn't know what to say. I nodded gently. She hugged me unexpectedly. "Thank you. I know it was you." I left the hall in silence. Outside, the air was colder than morning. The bare trees stood like timeless markers. I walked slowly to my car, each step touching dusty memories on the cold concrete road. In my pocket, I clutched an old photo, the one cropped to fit the frame that I'd quietly taken from my mother's living room. In it, I was still there, if only at an angle. But now, maybe I didn't need to stand at the edge anymore. I didn't need applause. I just needed a real look, even just once. And I had just received it. That night, back at Fort Campbell's temporary barracks, a brown envelope waited on my desk. No sender, no markings. Inside was a printout of an anonymous email titled "Reckless Operation. Civilian Casualties." I read each line. It accused a Colger's Hannah C. of leading an operation that caused civilian deaths and covering it up by altering post-mission reports. I closed the email, my heart cold, because I recognized the words, a verbatim excerpt from a classified report only 3 people had read. And one of them was Lena. I've always believed some wounds don't bleed, but seep silently through the years. And some farewells are never spoken aloud, just left in a dark corner waiting to be found. That night, after receiving the anonymous email bearing my name, I couldn't sleep. Though the temporary barracks room at Fort Campbell was so quiet, I could hear the wind through the door's cracks. My mind couldn't stop circling 3 words: civilian casualty charges. Someone, perhaps the closest person to me, had dug up the silent past I'd survived to forget. The next morning, I left the barracks and drove to the old wooden house where I grew up. My mother said I could pick up some old things. She didn't know I wasn't returning for jackets or yellowed notebooks. I came to find evidence, not to defend myself, but to remember who I was. A military wooden box was hidden under the staircase, ignored for nearly 2 decades. I wiped the thick dust off the lid, carefully opening layers of wrapped newspaper. The smell of damp wood, rusted metal, and dried sweat from battlefield years hit me a scent only survivors of missions would know. There were paper maps from the Libya operation, a cracked ID card from the Syria conflict zone, a small cloth bag with 3 unused bullets and a blood-stained gauze sealed in plastic, and then an old yellow envelope unsealed. Scrawled handwriting on the outside, Cooper, if you're alive to read this. I sat on the wooden floor, hands trembling, as I opened the letter. Cooper, if you're reading this, either we both survived or only you did. I don't know which is worse. I'm writing this at a field aid station after you pulled our platoon out of close-range fire in Quneitra. I'm wounded, but breathing, and I know that's because of you. You didn't have to go back. The order was only to secure the northern sector. But you went back alone, pulling each of us out of a minefield despite the dark and enemy planes circling overhead. No one will know this. No cameras, no reporters. But I know. And I want you to know my life, if it continues past tomorrow, is because of your decision. Sergeant Miguel Alvarez, Special Operations Force, Operation Candlestrike. I don't know when I started crying. I only remember clutching the letter until it crumpled, a nameless emotion surging, not pride, but validation. A late but real recognition from someone I'd saved. That night I left the letter on the living room table. Maybe unconsciously, maybe deliberately. I needed someone else to see it. Needed someone to understand why I lived quietly, why I stepped away from family life without resentment. Late that night I heard the door open. Light footsteps, not my father's, not my mother's. Lena. I didn't speak. Just lay still, hearing the rustle of paper. Then silence. For a long time. Minutes later, a soft sob, barely audible, but enough to make my chest ache. No one taught me how to forgive. But perhaps forgiveness begins with understanding when the one who called you a quitter cries upon realizing 30 lives once depended on your single, nameless decision. The next morning, Lena said nothing to me, but as I left, she slipped a note onto my car's steering wheel. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Now I'm starting to understand why you stayed silent. Thank you for the survivors, and those who never got to thank you. I didn't keep the note. But I kept that moment, like holding the first sprout of genuine remorse. That night in the barracks, I reopened the accusing email. I checked the metadata. The trail showed the sender wasn't just internal. It was someone who once had access to military systems but no longer did. A name surfaced in my mind. Derek Glade, former senior strategist, worked with me in Mosul. The man I overruled when he proposed attacking a civilian area, nursing a grudge ever since. I checked the old storage system. An unauthorized access. A command to copy classified documents inserted the day the anonymous email was sent. The real culprit might not be Lena, but someone who exploited her mistake and family prejudice to land a fatal blow. I looked out the window. Fort Campbell's sky was still pitch black, but I felt dawn approaching. If there's anything I'm more familiar with than battle maps, it's the feeling of being doubted. But this time the stab wasn't from enemy bullets, it was from the eyes of my own comrades, and most painfully the trace of my sister in a classified data leak. That morning at Fort Campbell wasn't quiet as usual. I woke to the shrill sound of a Level 2 internal security alert, a warning I knew only triggered when the system detected a breach of classified information. That familiar feeling chilled my heart before I even opened my eyes. Less than an hour later, I was summoned to the base's security command room. No shouting, no handcuffs, just skeptical looks and an empty chair facing 3 people, a security commander, an intelligence representative, and General McAllister. He looked at me with eyes both stern and regretful. Hannah, he said slowly, we need your cooperation in an investigation. The leaked data was tied directly to Operation Dagger, one of my special operations in Syria. The leak wasn't the full plan, but enough to endanger personnel still active in the region. Channel of dissemination, I asked, keeping my voice calm. An internal encrypted forum via a device once assigned your IP. I clenched my fist. I haven't used that device in nearly 2 years. It's in Fort Campbell's old data storage. We know. But in the last 48 hours, that IP was reactivated and logged into the system from within the barracks. Then I remembered 3 days ago Lena mentioned forgetting her laptop at the base's tech area after a training session. A thought flashed. No way. Was it her? But why? And who gave her access to that old system? That night, I returned to my room and requested full access to system logs and trace records. As a senior commander in Special Forces, I still had clearance for security monitoring protocols. I scoured the server logs and confirmed my suspicion the unauthorized access came from a device using Lena's credentials. But more chilling, the device wasn't on the official allocation list. It was a backup machine stored in the tech room, exactly where Lena said she forgot her laptop. The leaked data was packaged in an anonymous email sent via a temporary encrypted channel. The attached file after action Chosh review dagger.pdf, a report I approved 3 years ago, never released outside NATO systems. I opened the email's content. A chill ran down my spine. Dear Independent Investigation Agency, attached is evidence that a senior officer, Hannah Cooper, directly ordered an operation beyond her authority, causing civilian casualties in Syria. The attached report may have been concealed from official records. I send this not out of personal vendetta, but because the truth must be revealed. A familiar sentence froze me, nearly identical to a note in an internal summary I'd read, accessed by only 3 people, me, a NATO analyst, and Derek Glade. I knew I had to act fast. I called McAllister requesting to form an internal investigation team led by me. If you want the culprit, I'm the only one who understands the system and those who wanted me gone, I said, eyes unwavering. McAllister didn't respond immediately. After a pause, he nodded. But only if the team includes those involved. I understand. Who? He listed Lena for her link to the compromised device. My father, Colonel Cooper, who once oversaw Fort Campbell's archives, and my mother, who worked in forensic storage, skilled in analyzing biological and data traces. A family task force. Ironic, isn't it? The first meeting was tense, like a battlefield without guns. My father flipped through documents silently. Lena avoided my gaze. My mother glanced at me occasionally, neither judging nor revealing. I began analyzing the trace system. The compromised device is computer B45 once used in the strategy room. Logs show it was reactivated with Lena's credentials the night of the banquet. Lena looked up, pale. I didn't mean to. I only needed to print training materials and my laptop broke. Someone in tech lent me a spare. Who, I asked. Lena hesitated. Derek. The name again. Derek Glade. No doubt now. That night I returned to my room and printed a hard copy of the Operation Dagger summary I'd handwritten in the field. I compared each line, each mark. The leaked version was an unapproved draft with my handwritten notes. But one line was altered, a line inflating civilian casualties threefold, not in the original. Someone had tampered with the data and sent it as evidence. But they needed someone with access to execute it. And Lena, unknowingly, was the final link. I folded the report, hands clenched. I wasn't just suspected, I was set up. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Thought you could stay hidden forever. The truth will come out. Don't make me send the rest. A chill ran through me. They didn't just want to take me down. They wanted me stripped of rank trust from my own family. But this time I wasn't staying silent. They say the most dangerous enemy isn't the one pointing a gun at you, but the one patient enough to hide a knife and wait for you to fall. I've lived on the fragile line between life and death, trust and betrayal. But never have I stood in a maze this tight, where one wrong step could crush my career, honor, and memories. After last night's anonymous text, I couldn't sleep. I sat up all night at the screen tracing the metadata from the leaked Dagger report email. A small error in the transmission structure revealed a key detail. The email was sent via an old proxy server, once part of a 2017 Eastern Europe operations backup system. I frowned. I remembered clearly that year I led an operation in Mosul, Iraq. And a name snapped into focus like a shard of broken glass cutting through memory. Derek Glade. Derek was an ambitious strategist known for his strike hard, strike fast philosophy. In Mosul, he proposed a direct assault on an area suspected of housing terrorists, despite civilians still trapped there. I objected. Humanitarian data showed at least 27 women and children remained in the zone. I chose a containment strategy blending persuasion and soft intervention. It took 2 weeks, but all civilians survived. No one got a medal for it, but I was branded the obstacle to victory. After the operation, Derek was reassigned to strategic logistics, while I was pushed further into nameless zones. Back to the trace, I had the command's AI analyze anomalous logins tied to the old proxy server. After 3 hours, I had results a device had accessed the proxy through a hidden port at a time closely tied to the leak. Username DGL Strategy 17. It was him. I pulled up military personnel records. Derek Glade had retired early, citing mental health issues. But no one noticed he'd been around Fort Campbell's tech area recently as a seasonal strategic consultant. He was back, and he never took his eyes off me. The reason clear as day. He couldn't stand that I, the one who opposed him before the council was honored, bore the rank of general while he faded in silence. And he waited nearly 6 years biding his time, targeting the perfect weakness, the rift between me and Lena. I knew that to expose him, I'd have to do the hardest thing, return to the circle that once bled me my family. The next morning, I sent an urgent request to General McAllister form an independent investigation team led by me. For transparency, I named 3 members. My father, Colonel Cooper, who knew the archive system and physical security protocols. My mother, Claire, a former tactical and biological forensics expert. And Lena, the last person to touch the compromised system. I knew McAllister hesitated. No one puts a family at one investigation table. But I said, because we were a fractured family, only we know where the cracks are, and who tried to slip through. McAllister nodded after a pause. You have 7 days. If you're wrong, I'll be the first to sign your rank revocation. I'm not wrong, I replied. We just need the courage to face the truth. The Cooper task force convened that afternoon. In an old tactics training room, my father sat at the head, my mother opened files, and Lena kept her head down, silent. I began. We're not here to apologize. We're here to look in the same direction for the first time. I analyzed the encryption system. Logs from 2017 showed a Trojan code planted in the backup system never activated, until someone used an internal link to send an email from Lena's device. My mother pensive, like someone planted a minefield. One wrong step, and boom. I nodded. And that someone was Derek, I said, displaying camera footage from the base's tech area. It showed his face clearly 3 days before the leak. My father, usually reserved, spoke suddenly. Are you sure you want to continue? Hannah, if you do, you'll have to touch things you tried to forget. I looked at him, then Lena. If I don't, the next time won't be an email. It'll be a failed operation. A real death. And I can't let him win. Lena didn't look at me, but I saw her hand on the file gripping lightly. That night, I returned to my room, opened my laptop, logged into NATO's internal channel. I wrote a preliminary investigation report attaching evidence of Derek's presence at the base, but before sending, I hesitated. I opened an old note file, something I wrote in Mosul. One line stood out written when the line between reason and compassion was razor thin. Saving lives isn't just about orders. It's about not letting hatred pull the trigger. I wondered, was I repeating Derek's hatred by exposing him, or simply preventing someone else from being used as a pawn? I wasn't sure. But I knew the truth belongs to no one if no one dares step into the dark to bring it to light. Some family dinners are marked by laughter. For us, in the 3 weeks after our first internal investigation meeting, there was only the sound of keyboards and flipping files. I never thought I'd lead a mission with my own family. My father, retired Colonel Cooper, was tasked with managing the combat archive from his advisory days. He worked silently, as if rereading his own life, looking at no one, asking nothing. My mother, veteran combat medic, assisted with analyzing digitized data from old drives. She spoke little but nodded quietly when opening a file I'd sent from the Syrian border. And Lena, who once refused to see me as a teammate, sat across from me, eyes tense, responsible for checking and cross-referencing access logs for suspected Trojan infections. The room's atmosphere felt like a single, strong breath could collapse everything. Yet strangely, that silence made it clear this was the real front line. And this time, I wasn't fighting alone. We worked without titles, uniforms, or conference lights. Just a group bound by blood gathered around a torn honor and a breach threatening national security. I set a strict schedule: morning briefings, afternoon analysis. No one acted independently. No more arguments from Lena, no interruptions from Dad. Everyone listened to me, perhaps for the first time in my life. On the 6th day of the 2nd week, my mother arrived late. No one complained, but when she walked in and placed a thick plastic-wrapped file on the table, I saw her hands tremble slightly. Operation Candlestrike, she said, eyes fixed on me. You left this in your gear bag before you deployed. I never dared read it closely, until yesterday. I took it. The pages were yellowed. Inside were movement orders, tactical maps, and my scrawled handwriting, messy, but clear. At the end, my mother had clipped a small note. In her handwriting, You didn't run. You survived. I'd never cried in front of her. I didn't that day either. But something softened in me, and in her eyes, I saw something harder than an apology recognition. That night I stayed up until dawn, with Lena combing through access logs to Fort Campbell's secondary server. An unauthorized access 2 weeks prior had led to the Dagger data leak. The last time this IP was active was at the old tech storage bunker, Lena said, turning the screen to me. I recognized the coordinates. An abandoned bunker from 2019 once used by Derek Glade as a temporary strategy hub. Do you think Derek came back? Lena asked. I nodded. He didn't come back. He never left. My sister's eyes wavered. Then she said softly, I'm sorry, Hannah. Not just for what I thought, but for thinking I understood you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words just staying up until 3 a.m. together to stop a former comrade from branding you a traitor. The next day, my father found something critical. The base's original network access map had a hidden subroute buried in a 2017 PDF from the Mosul operation. It was the moment I opposed Derek Glade's plan to clear a civilian area to eliminate insurgents. I chose a riskier, slower plan, but it saved civilians. Derek was furious then. Now I understood. Instead of confronting me directly, he planted a Trojan in the system waiting for someone to trigger it, and Lena, during a routine data check requested by command, unknowingly did just that. We held our final meeting that Saturday afternoon. The room saw its first smile faint, but real. I presented everything: the Trojan's path access timestamps, Derek's manipulation logic. Everyone fell silent as I concluded. This wasn't an accident. It was a strike planned 7 years ago, my mother said, and he used the cracks between you girls to pry it open. No one argued. We all knew Derek was the knife, but our family's coldness and pride were the crack. That night, I wrote a report to General McAllister, requesting permission to pursue Derek Glade under special protocol. I added a note. I once thought blood couldn't make an effective combat unit. I was wrong. When I submitted the report, my father placed something small on my desk, his old, distinguished service medal. You don't need a new one, he said. You need one that's recognized. I held it, heavy, not from metal, but from memory. Not every battle begins with gunfire. Some hunts start with silence, the silence between family members, the silence in an investigation room where each data point is a bone of buried truth. I never thought I'd lead a mission where every team member shared my last name, Cooper. And now we stepped together into a final task tracking Derek Glade, the man who orchestrated this tragedy, with ruthless patience and deep knowledge of the cracks in my heart, my sister's, and our home. That evening, after hours of tracing virtual access, the system flagged an anomaly from a device decommissioned 3 years ago. It was reactivated at an old motel 7 miles from Fort Campbell, just outside control, but close enough to blend into the barracks' shadow. I signaled Lena. She said nothing, just nodded. My father sat at the table's end, folding an internal base map, his eyes piercing the report. My mother stood handing me an old backpack. Wear this armor. Yours from 2016. I kept it. Each moved with purpose. No one spoke more than needed. But something had changed. We weren't hiding wounds anymore. We were a team, a family for the first time. The raid happened at 03:27 a.m. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just the wind through gray trees and the soft tread of military boots on dry earth. Derek Glade sat alone in room 204. Laptop open, data transmission, blinking blue. When the door was breached, he didn't flinch. Didn't run. He just looked at me and said calmly, I wondered how long it'd take you to find me. I cuffed him, staring into the eyes of the man who once led a strategy team advised me in Mosul before I rejected his plan. You broke the rules, betrayed the system. Why? Derek shrugged. I didn't have to do much, Hannah. Your family did the work better than I expected. I just dropped the bait and waited for you to strangle each other. In the interrogation room, Derek spoke like he was teaching a strategy class. He'd monitored military data from old servers, noticed Lena's accidental access exposure during training. He copied the email template using that flaw to craft the first anonymous letter. I knew the right memory, the right push. You were erased from the family photo. Lena always felt overshadowed by you, even when you weren't there. Right. A crack doesn't need to be deep, just timed right. Each word struck our pride, but the deepest pain wasn't Derek's scheme. It was the truth. He didn't create the distance between us. He just exploited it. After the interrogation, I stood alone in the hallway, leaning against the cold concrete wall. Lena approached, silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. You once said the scariest thing isn't being hurt. It's being hurt by family. I didn't understand, but I'm starting to now. I turned to my sister. Her eyes no longer belonged to the ambitious officer who mocked me, called me someone who was in the military. They were the eyes of a woman learning trust anew. My father, who never apologized, came to my side. He said nothing, just handed me a file. On the cover, Operation Dagger, independent analysis from command. Inside were clean conclusions. No trace of betrayal from me. All evidence pointed to Derek. My mother came last, placing a hand on my shoulder. She didn't say I'm sorry. She said, "You're not the loser. You're the survivor, and we owe you the truth." That night the family sat around the meeting table, a map spread between us. No food, no laughter, but for the first time our eyes didn't avoid each other. My father said I've led many operations, but never an investigation where everyone involved had to forgive each other. Lena bowed her head. "I wanted to prove I was better than you. But I realized envy doesn't make me stronger. It just makes me smaller." I said nothing, just looked at each of them, then spoke. "Tomorrow, we have one more task. Submit the investigation, close the case, and above all, finish what never started between us, trust." As I left the room, Kentucky's sky was pitch black, but I saw clearly darkness can be where truth begins. And sometimes to find light, we must walk through it together. In my final report that night, I added a short note. Wounds in war are real, but wounds in silence endure longer. Only by facing each other do we learn the enemy isn't always from outside. I folded the report, placed it in the file for Central Military Command. Tomorrow I'd close the investigation. But another journey had begun, not with Derek, but with Lena. Forgiveness isn't declaring a wound healed. It's having the courage to hold on to each other despite the pain. That morning before submitting the official investigation report to command, Lena handed me a sealed envelope handwritten on the outside accountability. I opened it. It was her formal admission of fault. She requested a disciplinary review for her negligence in accessing classified data, ready to accept any military consequence. At the same time, command responded with the investigation's outcome. All evidence confirmed Derek Glade as the mastermind. But Lena's error, though unintentional, violated security protocols. The penalty of 5-year suspension from promotion consideration. No reassignment, no demotion. A suspended sentence heavy enough to warn, light enough to redeem through action. I didn't intervene. Lena didn't ask. It was what she needed to do, not for me, but for herself. That afternoon at the investigation's closing briefing, I stood beside General McAllister. Fort Campbell's hall was packed. No celebratory speeches, no medals. But in that air I felt something I hadn't in years. My father, always reserved, stepped to the microphone mid-meeting and asked to speak. "I'm Colonel Cooper, served over 30 years, once thought honor was the goal. But today I say, Hannah, I was wrong to let honor cast a shadow over you. I'm sorry not just for not standing by you, but for not seeing you." A long moment followed. The hall was silent. I looked at my father, then at Lena. She stood among the officers, not crying, just clutching her hands, holding something back from breaking. That night, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, my family had a real dinner. No files, no charts, no orders. We didn't talk about the operation. Or mistakes. My mother shared how she once considered quitting nursing to bake. My father laughed, a sound I thought I'd lost from memory. Lena poured wine. She looked at me, saying softly, "I thought forgiveness was weakness. But seeing you stand there needing no one to kneel, no public apology. Just the truth, I realized forgiveness is strength." I raised my glass. Didn't say thank you, but my eyes said enough. A week later, I received approval to teach at Fort Campbell's Military Academy in the Restructuring Ethics and Humanitarian Strategy in Combat program. In my first class, I began, "War isn't just between nations. Sometimes it's within a family. The hardest part isn't winning. It's knowing who's worth keeping." Mid-class, I saw Lena in the back row. In full uniform, no defiance in her eyes, just focus. She wasn't there to support. She was there to learn, and I believe to listen. After class, as others left, she approached my desk, placed a paper there. "I want to start over, Hannah. Not as your sister, but as an officer, your student." I took the paper, an application to join the Military Ethics Research Group. Signed, Lena Cooper. On the drive back, I watched the iron gates open before me. Gates not just to the barracks, but a symbol that what was closed can be reopened. If we're brave enough. I once thought I was the one left out, but I was just the one who went ahead. And today, for the first time, I saw I wasn't walking alone anymore. Not every gate opens when you knock. Some only open when those inside change. I hadn't returned to West Point in nearly 2 decades. Not out of fear, but because I once believed someone like me no longer belonged there. So when I received an invitation from the Academy's superintendent, a gold-embossed card reading inviting Brigadier General Hannah Cooper to speak at the spring graduation, I sat in silence all afternoon. I didn't reply immediately. I needed to understand what was being offered. An honorary gesture, a correction, or a chance to close what was never truly finished. The graduation was held in the main square where I once stood rigid in the cadet line, sweat soaking my back in my first summer of military life. I didn't wear a uniform. I chose a simple suit with a small pin on the left, the emblem of the Strategic Intelligence Force, the unit I served for nearly 20 years without public recognition. As I stepped to the podium, I saw the front row of senior officers. There was Lena next to my mother. My father was there too, his face solemn, but his eyes softer. I began my speech with a seemingly simple line. I once thought glory was something given to you. Now I know glory is what you learn to preserve even when no one sees. I spoke of Mosul choosing not to bomb a neighborhood on suspicion, risking to save 30 civilians through a crossfire. I spoke of a night in Libya, when I had to leave a wounded teammate to save panicked civilians. I don't regret that choice, I said, but I'll carry the guilt forever. That's the cost of battlefield ethics. The square was silent. I knew those young cadets were listening, not just with their ears, but with hearts yet to be seasoned by war's smoke. I didn't teach them to win. I hoped they'd learn to survive without losing their humanity. I ended, I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here to say that those who step out of line aren't always failures. Sometimes they're just finding another way to serve what's right. The superintendent stepped onto the stage holding a small wooden box. Brigadier General Hannah Cooper, he said, his voice ringing across the Quad West Point, once recorded your withdrawal as a failure. Today, this academy recognizes your service as a symbol. He opened the box, revealing 2 items, a restored West Point honorary degree after nearly 20 years, and the officer's badge I returned when I left. I couldn't stop the tears. Not because I was honored, because at last truth had overcome silence. And then in that silent crowd, a single clap rang out, clear, resolute. I turned. It was Lena. She stood still in uniform, clapping steadily. No one else rose immediately. But a beat later, my mother stood, then my father. Then the entire square ignited in a chain reaction, thousands of hands clapping in unison. I saw Lena smile, not with pride or suppressed pain, just relief. After the ceremony, we didn't go home right away. I took Lena around the campus, showing her where I stood for punishment, where I cried, where I wanted to quit. I'm sorry, Lena said, passing the central chapel. I shook my head. I, too, once wanted to shine so badly I forgot that being understood matters more than being applauded. Lena took my hand. Thank you for not leaving me behind even when you had every reason to. That night, I sat rewriting my speech, sealing it in an envelope. I sent it to an address no one mentions anymore, the family of Sergeant Miguel Alvarez, who died after I saved him and his team. In the letter I wrote, he said I didn't need to be in the family photo to be remembered. Today I was called by my true name, stood in my true place, and seen with true eyes. And I believe he was there watching. Not every frame needs editing. Some just need the right person to return to their place. I came home after the West Point graduation, with a strange feeling no longer weighed down. No longer guessing whose eyes avoided mine. For the first time in years, I opened the door and stepped into my own space without feeling like a guest. My mother was the first to emerge from the kitchen. She didn't hug me, but she handed me a folded note with one handwritten line. Are you eating enough? I smiled. A simple American question where love often comes through actions, not words. But in it were years she couldn't ask, or I wasn't brave enough to hear. I nodded. This time, yes. Enough food and kindness. At dinner, my father brought out an old wooden box. Inside were stacks of family photos over the years. He placed one on the table. It was a Christmas photo from nearly 15 years ago, the frame I'd been cropped from to fit. No one spoke for a long moment. Then he set the photo down, exhaling softly. This one's missing someone. Let's take it again. The table fell silent. My mother stood fetching the camera from the room. Lena turned on the living room lights. And I stood still for a long moment, looking at the old photo, then at the empty chair in the middle. I sat in it. Lena approached, holding a small box. Open it. Inside was a mini birthday cake. Iced on top were 3 words. General, sister, teacher. I looked at my sister. No spelling mistakes this time. Lena laughed. I double-checked. Then she lowered her head, speaking slowly. I got it right because I want you to know you're not just a title. You're someone I'm proud to call family. After dinner, we lined up on the porch. My father clicked the camera. No posing, no styling, just standing together. But this time I didn't shrink to the edge. I wasn't cropped out. I stood in the center between Lena and my parents. I once thought a photo couldn't change the past. I was wrong. Because sometimes the past doesn't need changing. It just needs to be seen with gentler, kinder, more honest eyes. That night, as everyone slept, I sat alone in the living room. On the table were 3 things: Sergeant Alvarez's letter, the newly printed photo, the West Point badge. I picked up the letter, reading it again. Still the hurried scrawl, the words of thanks I once didn't dare believe were real. Then I held the photo. In it I smiled, not because I won, but because I was seen. After years of being erased, finally I placed the badge beside them. 3 pieces of a life, 3 chapters closed. But one thing remained unfinished. The next morning I returned to Fort Campbell, but this time I didn't teach. I sat in Lena's class she was presenting on ethical leadership in war crises. She ended with a quote from an old training document. I recognized it instantly, a line from my 2012 Syria report read only by command. A leader isn't the one at the front. It's the one who dares stay at the back, pushing others forward. Lena looked at me. You wrote that. And today I understand what it means. We walked out to the courtyard. The midday sun was gentler than I expected. Lena said, I don't promise I won't mess up again, but I promise I won't let myself err in silence. I nodded. I don't promise I won't hurt, but I promise I won't leave you alone anymore. I was once nameless in my own family, but now I don't need a name to be called a medal to be recognized. I just need to be present, fully, wholly seen. The new family photo didn't change the past, but it changed how we live with it. And maybe, as Lena said sometimes, to love someone you don't need to speak. Just ask, are you eating enough? I stood, leaving the table, letting morning light spill over the chair. The chair once without my name. Now it's mine. And if you ask what my greatest military achievement was, I'd say not a medal, not a rank, but a place in the family photo. My story isn't just a journey from the battlefield. It's the journey of a woman erased from her own family photo, called a quitter, who lived in silence, but chose to stand because of things unseen and people yet to understand. Through these pages, I hope you've seen that honor isn't just from medals or ceremonies, but from the courage to forgive, return, and rebuild ties with your own. If this story touched you even a small part, please follow the channel, share your thoughts, or send it to someone who might need a kinder look at their past. I'm Hannah Cooper, and I believe everyone deserves a place in their family's photo. Thank you for joining me. See you in the next story.